Welcome back into another episode of Women's Basketball Now here on the Hoop Central YouTube channel. This is Hamilton Neal joining you as always. We want to take the time as well to thank you for joining us. Also, we got a lot of content coming up after this 2-week break on the Hoop Central YouTube channel. We got a ton of videos coming up, and we're going to start with this one, Women's Basketball Now podcast. We're going to be talking a lot about transfer news here on this show. We're going to talk about Lopez-Senechal to UConn. We're going to talk about Taylor Jones to Texas. We're going to talk about Kennedy Brown going to Duke. We'll also look as well at Abby Meyers going from Princeton to Maryland. Those are the 4 players that we're going to be talking about in the transfer portion of this show. And then we're going to talk a little bit of recruiting news as Janiah Barker is headed to Texas A&M after her decommitment from Georgia. We'll go into the details of that coming up a little bit later. But again, first, we're going to start this Women's Basketball Now podcast with some transfer news and start by talking about the UConn Huskies, as they have landed one of the best players in the transfer portal, 6'1" forward Lopez-Senechal from Fairfield. Again, one of the biggest names in the entire transfer portal, and not coming from one of the biggest schools at Fairfield, but she was extremely productive in her time there. This past season, she averaged 19.6 points and 4.6 rebounds. She was the MAC leading scorer, led them to the NCAA tournament, got them to the first round where they fell to Texas. That was the first time that they had made the NCAA tournament, though, since 2001. So definitely a lot of success this past season, not just for Lopez-Senechal individually, but Fairfield as a team had great success. They won the 2022 MAC championship and again played Texas in the first round of the tournament. She was the unanimous Conference Player of the Year this past season, and for her entire career, had just under 1,600 points, had 470 rebounds, was efficient shooting from the floor at 43.3%, and her 38.8% clip from 3 definitely going to help UConn from the perimeter, because obviously we know the Huskies have Paige Beckers, they have Caroline Ducharme, AZ Fudd as threats to shoot the basketball from the outside, but you look at a player like Nika Mule, you look at someone like Aubrey Griffin, those are players that are not as big perimeter threats. So you bring a player like Lou in who can shoot the 3 and shoot it consistently. That's only going to help UConn on the offensive end. And UConn still has not addressed that issue of post play yet in the transfer portal. Obviously, they're still in the running for Bria Cunningham, 2023 5-star post player. We talked about that in our last video on our last UConn podcast. We talked about the need for post play, and it's still there. It's still a glaring hole for UConn. But for them to get a 6'1" forward here that can play make and that can score from inside and from outside, that's going to help them quite a bit. Again, offensively, shooting from 3, that's something that they struggled with a little bit during the course of the season. They got better with it during the NCAA tournament going into that national championship game. But again, the need for outside shooting is always there. And if UConn can add another player, that's always going to help them. And they were able to do that here with Lopez-Senechal. Again, huge addition for them. In other Huskies news, Caroline Ducharme just underwent hip surgery, and that was successful. She's expected to be back for the preseason, for the workouts and everything going into the fall. So continue to keep an eye on that as well. Obviously, UConn still trying to recruit in 2023. Their 2022 class of Ice Brady and Ayanna Patterson locked down. Those 2 are signed and coming in, and are also going to provide a huge boost on the interior. Again, Patterson at the wing, Brady at the forward spot. Out of those 2, you think who can make the biggest impact? It's going to be interesting to see, because Patterson is just uber talented at the wing spot. Can score inside, can score outside. Her athleticism, she has drawn comparisons to NaLyssa Smith. I think she's even more consistent on the perimeter than NaLyssa Smith coming into Baylor was. So she is obviously a huge addition. And then Brady's going to bring physicality in the post. And that's, again, something that UConn needs, not just in 2023. They're trying to get Cunningham. Absolutely, she's definitely a huge target. But Brady does fill that need a little bit to get more physicality in the post. So again, those are just some of the things happening at UConn right now, but obviously the big news is Lopez-Senechal coming in from Fairfield. Now let's talk about 2 Oregon State transfers that have been on their way out and have chosen new schools, Taylor Jones and Kennedy Brown. These 2 players were part of a very big, successful 2019 recruiting class for Oregon State, and those 2 were expected to be part of the core long-term for them. And they were expected to be the duo inside that would give other Pac-12 teams trouble. The only problem with that was they didn't get on the floor much together. Taylor Jones missed her entire sophomore season because she had an injury during her freshman year in 2019. That was a torn ACL. She played this past season the entire year, and we're going to talk more about her stats and everything in a moment. And then you look at Taylor Jones. She missed most of the 2021 season this past year with an injury, just played 9 games. things have not gone well for Oregon State of late. Yes, they've done some good recruiting, but the 5-star recruits that they have brought in, like Jones, like Brown, like Greta Kampschrader, they're transferring out. Oregon State did not make the NCAA tournament this past year, and it was definitely a down season for them. And while they have a huge 2022 class coming in with multiple 5-stars, like Reagan Beers and Tamia Gardner, there's a sense that this program is losing a little bit of that stability that they've had, especially with key core players like this transferring out. Taylor Jones is heading to Texas. Obviously, she came out of Texas during her high school recruitment and was, at one point, probably leaning towards the Longhorns in her original recruitment, decided to go with Oregon State, and she's going to have a couple years of eligibility, 2 years to be exact. She was a 3-year starter at Oregon State, all Pac-12 conference honoree as well. Now, despite that, she missed most of the 2021-22 season. She played only 9 games this past year with averages of 12.4 points and 6.9 rebounds. She played an entire season in 2019, an entire season in 2020, and that 2020 season was definitely her best so far. She averaged 12.3 points per game, had 8.9 rebounds. That led the Pac-12 conference, and she shot 55.6% from the floor. That was second in the conference. So she can definitely bring, again, more of that size, more of that physicality to Texas. And what helped them make a run this year and why they were so successful was inside-outside balance. Rory Harmon on the outside was really consistent for them. On the interior, though, they had some good players as well, like Lauren Ebo, like Deona Gaston. And Jones is going to bring that size and some of that versatility as well. Definitely a double-double threat and almost averaged a double-double in 2020 and was having some good games in 2021, had some good averages before she went down with injury. Kennedy Brown is going to Duke. The Duke Blue Devils, obviously a very interesting team to talk about, especially just how last season went for them. You know, they started really hot. They were in the top 15 of the AP poll, and then they lost a game to South Carolina, and then they started to head into that downward spiral from there. And remember, last offseason, they were bringing in tons of transfers from left and right. It was just so impressive to see Carol Lawson do that recruiting and have that pitch to bring players in. You know, Amani Lewis came in from Wisconsin. You had Lexi Gordon from Texas Tech. You had so many players coming from many different schools, and things have been a little quiet for them this offseason. They did bring in Reagan Richardson from Georgia. Obviously, there's been a mass exodus at Georgia with Joni Taylor leaving, going to Texas A&M. We're going to talk more about that with Janiah Barker a little bit later. So they bring in Reagan Richardson, but they also bring in Kennedy Brown, who, standing 6'6", is the tallest Duke player since Azrae Stevens years ago. Remember, Azrae Stevens was a big-time player for the Duke Blue Devils many years ago. Ended up leaving to go to play for Gino Auriemma and UConn. Duke has not had that type of size since Azrae Stevens. Now they have that with Kennedy Brown. And again, she missed all of the 2020-2021 season with a torn ACL. That injury was back during the 2019-2020 season when she was a freshman. Now, she did start 21 of 30 games this past year and had some decent stats, 7.9 points and 6.3 rebounds per game. Again, in 21 of 30 games she started. So she's going to bring some consistency and bring some size. Now, if she can stay healthy, she will be a threat for this team, because the way that she can move at her size and cut and pass the basketball, it's very impressive. Now, as a scoring threat, she's not quite as effective as Taylor Jones, say, her former teammate. But if you give her the ball, give her opportunities, we could see some good things from Kennedy Brown. And I think there's a mid-range game that Carol Lawson could unlock as well that we didn't see a ton of at Oregon State. So Taylor Jones is going to Texas. Kennedy Brown is going to Duke. Abby Meyers is headed to Princeton. Remember, on one of our recent podcasts a couple of weeks ago, we talked about Abby Meyers being one of the biggest names in the transfer portal. And you looked at schools like UConn, you looked at schools like North Carolina being in the mix. But the Maryland Terrapins, a school that they've been very active in the transfer portal this offseason because of the amount of players that left their team. They need to replenish. They need to bring players in to make up for those losses. Abby Meyers coming in definitely helps them because they lost Ashley Owusu, who was their starting point guard, eventually went to the bench, but for the most part was their starting point guard for a number of years. Obviously, they lost Angel Reese as well, and they're starting to fill those gaps. So you have Abby Meyers coming in, definitely going to provide some scoring for them. She was the leading scorer in the Ivy League last year at 18.2 points per game. She averaged 5.9 rebounds as well. She helped Princeton to a 25-5 record and a first-round win over Kentucky in the NCAA tournament. They won the Ivy League title and again got to that second round, in large part because of Abby Meyers. And again, this is the fourth offseason addition for Maryland. They're bringing in Gia Cook and Brianna McDaniel, who both were committed to Texas A&M. Obviously, with the coaching change there, those two weren't going to stay on, so both of them are coming in as recruits for Maryland. You also have Alyssa Pinson coming in from South Florida as a transfer. And a couple of other freshmen coming in for Maryland are Ava Ciola and Mayla Reynolds. Those two were committed previously. So far this offseason, you have now 4 additions for Maryland. And Abby Meyers is by far the best addition of the 4, for sure, no question. The other 3 are really skilled, really talented. But when you look at a player that was courted as much as Abby Meyers was in the transfer portal coming out of Princeton, huge get for Brenda Fries, because things were starting to fall apart a little bit for them. Or as this offseason was starting, obviously with all the players transferring out. But now you have a player like this coming in, it's going to change the complexion of their basketball team, because they're not going to return many players from last year's starting lineup. It's going to be a very different team. And I would expect Abby Meyers to be the number 1 option on this team, no question about it. Because with no Angel Reese, with no Owusu, with all the other players that are leaving, they're going to need someone, especially in the backcourt, to step up. And Abby Meyers, I definitely think, will be that player. I think she can average close to 18 points per game at Maryland, just because of the players that they are not bringing back. And this team won't be quite as talented as others. This Maryland team for 2022 won't quite be the team they had in 2020 or in 2021. So Meyers is going to have to really step up and have some big games if they want to have a chance to be one of the best teams in the country. So that's a really big addition as well. And again, there are so many other players in the portal right now coming in and going out. And on future podcasts coming up soon, we're going to talk about more programs. But here we talked about Lopez-Senechal going from Fairfield to UConn, a couple of Oregon State transfers finding new homes, Taylor Jones to Texas, Kennedy Brown to Duke, and obviously Abby Meyers there to Princeton. So again, that's what's going on in terms of the transfer portal. We'll have much more to talk about, again, coming up in future podcasts. But before we wrap up this show, we want to talk a little bit about recruiting as well. A big piece of recruiting news that has come in over the past week is 2022 5-star forward Janiah Barker has committed to Texas A&M and is signed with the Texas A&M Aggies. She follows Joni Taylor to A&M, who was previously the head coach at Georgia. Barker committed to Georgia while Joni Taylor was there. Now that Joni Taylor has left to go to Texas A&M to replace Gary Blair, Barker is following her to College Station. And this changes the whole complexion of their basketball team for this upcoming season, because you bring in a player that's ranked number 3 overall, number 1 at the forward spot, and just led Montverde Academy to their first ever Geico High School Nationals Championship. And in doing so, she averaged 17.6 points to go along with 8.9 rebounds, shooting 50% from the floor and 35% from 3. And that's the main stat that I really want to point out here. 35% from 3. I understand it's at the high school level, and going to the college level, the defenses are going to be tougher. The attention that she's going to draw is going to be a lot more. And players are going to be bigger, faster, stronger. I get that. But the fact that she's shooting that consistently from 3 as a forward, you got to feel good about her as not just an inside threat, obviously, where she is really tough and physical, but as an outside threat also. Emerging perimeter threat. You could see some mid-range there as well. So just that aspect itself has got to be very exciting for Joni Taylor, bringing Janiah Barker in. She plays with a lot of effort. She's a strong defender, a very good rebounder also, and those are those elements that you want to find in every good post player: the effort, the drive, the consistency. Active offensively, creates space, and draws a ton of attention. Again, is very physical with her size and with her strength. So offensively, you see that inside ability, but also that emerging outside ability. And then on defense, you're going to see her active, taking up space, trying to block shots. Even when she's not blocking shots, when she's altering shots and she's helping her team on that end, that's only going to help her become a better player over time. Because to be successful at the college level in the post, obviously you got to have it offensively, but defensively, you got to put in that effort as well. That's where it all starts and ends. And again, Janiah Barker ranked number 3 overall, number 1 at the forward spot according to ESPNW, and she is the highest ranked player to ever commit to Texas A&M out of the ESPNW rankings since those started. So this is obviously a very huge pickup for Texas A&M and Coach Joni Taylor. And as far as 2022 recruiting goes, that's about going to wrap things up. Every player is off the board at this point, and we're looking now at 2023. Obviously, a lot of players at the top are already committed, but we have some top targets for many of the best programs in the country that are still on the board, including Madison Booker, including Bria Cunningham. Chloe Kitts is a player that's starting to get a lot of attention. 2024 recruiting is picking up. We'll talk some about 2025 as well. Again, not as many players to go over there, but you see some of those players picking up offers and new interest. Aaliyah Chavez is widely considered as the best player in that class of 2025. So we're going to talk more about her. We're going to talk all about recruiting coming up in future podcasts as well. So here on this episode of Women's Basketball Now, we talked a lot about transfer stuff. Again, Lopez-Senechal going to UConn, Oregon State transfers finding new homes, Abby Meyers going to Princeton, and Janiah Barker going to Texas A&M with some big recruiting news. So thank you as always yet again for tuning in to the Hoop Central YouTube channel. We're going to have many more videos coming out soon. This is Hamilton Neal leaving you for now, but I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.